This is the future. Evolution.
The Crossing Realms Conference launches September 19th and 20th and will dock in Richmond, Missouri. This is already being called the event of the year, folks. With an unprecedented list of speakers and special guests, 2 days of cryptids, UFOs, and paranormal presentations, along with a celebrity-filled ghost hunt, meet and greet, gallery reading, vendors, and a film screening. This promises to be both educational and fun. Go to Eventbrite.com to secure your tickets and vendor slots before they are all abducted. They're going fast.
Hello, everybody. How's it going? It's Friday night. Well, Friday evening, 6 o'clock in the East, wherever you are out there. Happy weekend to you. The weekend has finally arrived. Yes, it has. And I'm really excited about it. The weather is going to start turning for us here in the great state of Michigan. I'm just so sick of this 30-degree weather we've been having. Right now it's about 41 degrees out here, and it did snow a little bit. But I'm looking forward to getting out there. Spring can't come fast enough for me, so I can attend to the yard. Lots of things to do in the yard. I appreciate each and every single one of you for coming on in. I've got 3 pretty cool encounters. Uh, they all revolve around like the werewolves or Dogman, and I think they're quite. I think you're gonna like them. For those of you that are newer, as you know, I've been doing this. I've been collecting these accounts from people for the last couple of years, 2.5 years, and I've got many stored away in the archives that I like to share to you guys. I used to do these in more of a video form. And, over the last 2 months, I've been doing lives on Fridays, and you guys really you like them better than the videos. So I'm just going to keep rolling with this until I decide to change up the format. So I'm going to roll with this on Fridays. Thanks to everybody for coming in. And also, you guys, I do want to thank everybody for buying my books. You know where they're at. They're on Amazon. Bigfoot Michigan Rob presents True Cryptid Encounters, Book 1 and Book 2. Simply type Bigfoot Michigan Rob in your Amazon browser. And if you buy it, please leave a review. It does help the analytics. I appreciate that. The link for Book 2 is pinned up top here, and the links for the other book is on my profile page and in the description of the shows. So thanks for that. Really quickly, I'm not going to get into it. We have the conference coming up the 19th and 20th of September. Get your tickets on Eventbrite. That's also in the profile page. I think it's going to be one hell of a show. A lot of great speakers, a lot of cool special guests. It's a 2-day event with a ghost hunt and everything else mixed in between. If you're into UFOs, paranormal, and of course, cryptids, that's the event to be at coming up in September. So thank you. Once again, if it is your first time here, please subscribe to Bigfoot Michigan Rob on YouTube, the Blondes and the Booze Paranormal Podcast on YouTube, Texas Front Porch, Donnie Cho Says Stuff, Paranormal Paul, Daniel Diva, and of course, Monica Rollins, Our Paranormal World. So go check them out. In fact, after this show, leading up to the Blondes and the Booze, they'll be on a little later after this show. So thank you for that. And of course, don't forget, super chats are open. It's a great way to support the show and what I do. I appreciate that in advance. You can become a BMR pirate. Join today, mateys. Join the many. Join the few. Depends on your point of view. Thank you to Keith for getting things started with an awesome super chat. My good buddy from Michigan, Keith, gets the parties started with an awesome super chat. Appreciate you. I appreciate you, Keith, and thank you so much for that. Pretty awesome. So I'm going to get into these for you guys, and there's 3 of them I've got, and one of them takes place. I got this from this guy named Jake, and it's about his grandfather's place where back in the day, there was the Civil War was going on, and there was alleged, werewolves or dogmans were part of a battle that took place around here, which later on in his story, as it unfolds, you're going to find out about, which I thought to be very fascinating. And the second one is about an alleged Dogman Encounter in the Allegheny National Park. And then I'm going to finish it up with some creature from another young lady that sent this on in about some creature that's been wreaking havoc in Lake Superior. So I got 3 nice ones, 3 very cool ones for you guys to get the show started today. So I appreciate you guys. Please, of course, hit the thumbs up. Show me the like. Show me the love. I appreciate each and every single one of you for coming on in. And who's in here before I get rolling really quick? I'm just going to do a quick little roll call. Not many of you right now, about 40 of you. Audacious Amber, Bigfoot Dwarf, Joe Stewart. Hey, Joe, what's happening, Joe? Mr. G Rides, Gemini Moon from Michigan. Hi, Gem. Good to see you once again. Mike Hunt. Good to see Mike. Made it on in. Canna Dummy. What's up, Canna Dummy? Thanks for coming in. Andrew Gnomes. Andrew bought his tickets for the conference. The trucking guy, he'll be down. Thanks for that. I look forward to meeting you. Scrolling down a little bit further. Michelle. Hey, Michelle. Good to see you, Michelle. Moose McGrew. Hey, Moose. Good to see you. Hans Baracco. Hello, brother. Good to see you. Don Moore. Good to see Don Moore for joining us. Val from Pennsylvania. Hi, Val. How you doing? Yes, the second one is kind of in your area, Val. Sorry to tell you. Let's see. Scrolling down. Sparky's Paranormal Outdoors. Great to see you. Thanks for coming back on in. I like Ike. That's, of course, Pancho Zorch. Good to see you. Scrolling down a little bit further. Mickey G. Hi, Mickey. How you doing? If I missed you, I'm sorry. I'm trying to get through this a little quickly for you guys. I know you don't want to hear all this. You want me to get started here. Let's see. We got Keith already. Scott. Hey, Scott. Good to see Scott. Thanks for coming on in. Delta Dog. DA. Delta Dog in the house. Good to see you. And scrolling down a little bit further here. Yeah, it's let's see if I miss you. Okay, it looks like we're Amy Crew. Hey, matey, good to see Amy. Thanks for coming on in. So yeah, that's about it for right now. It looks like for the time being. Thank you. If I missed you, I apologize. I want to get on with this, so I appreciate all your love, your support, and of course, please subscribe if you are new. So I'm going to get on with these. And Barbara, hey Barbara, good to see Barbara. So again, I got this from this person, Jake, and he goes on to tell me about this story, this encounter, which he experienced, and also as he found out his grandfather was telling him a couple legendary stories as we move on. So this young Jake goes on to say that he was raised by his grandfather. And he was raised by his grandfather in the late 1960s through the end of the 1970s. And Jake goes on to tell me that while he was, when he was about 15 years old, his mother and his father, they were both killed in an automobile accident. He goes on to say, Rob, my world turned upside down. As a 15-year-old, he goes on to explain to me is that he now had to move in with his grandfather, who lived alone with his wife, his grandmother, who eventually, right before the grandson moved in, Jake had passed away. And she was much too young in life, as he goes on to explain, for the passing away. So right off the bat, a little bit of trauma is setting in, both of his parents, his grandmother. So young Jake, he's dealing with some issues, some tragedy. Okay. Very traumatic experience, he goes on to say. And young Jake goes, hey, Rob, what even made this really even a little more worse was the fact that he never really saw his grandfather while he was growing up as a young child. His grandfather lived in Mineral Wells, West Virginia, and he had lived in St. Louis. So really up until the time where he had to move in with Grandpa, they were not really familiar with each other. Very rarely saw each other. And he goes on to say that, Rob, my grandfather's lifestyle, it was something that he was really unfamiliar with. Okay. He goes on to say, it felt like he was living with a stranger. And he says where he lived was very crude, kind of abysmal and depressing for this young kid. So in his new place to live with his grandfather, he said it sat on about 50 acres out in the woods of Mineral Wells. He goes on to say, Rob, there were no neighbors, no kids to play with. The school was several miles away. And he goes on to say, Rob, I never graduated from high school. Hey, John, how you doing, buddy? Wendy, good to see you. Nikki G. He goes on to say that, Rob, unfortunately, my grandfather was an alcoholic. His grandfather never, ever got him to school on time. And in fact, he says he hardly got him to school at all. I didn't go on to ask him about the busing or anything like that, but let's just face it, this kid is suffering from some trauma, an unknown environment, no friends, and it's a tough life for this kid starting out, right? He goes on to tell me that, Rob, I even wondered how my grandfather even had money to pay or buy anything. He says there was this one time that his grandfather did provide him clothing, but he says, Rob, the clothes were used and they barely fit his body. Hi, Hooking. Young Jake goes on to tell me that he was going through all these growth spurts. Frankly, Rob, he goes on to say, he was just embarrassed to even go to school. Rob, the majority of what I ate, Grandpa hunted. He said, the one thing that my grandfather did teach me, however, he goes on to say, is that his grandfather taught him, showed him how to hunt, showed him how to track. He tells young Jake that I don't have much, but you will learn how to live off of the land, as his grandfather tells his grandson. Rob, he says, the home that I was living in was it was just falling apart. By today's standards, Jake goes on to tell me, thanks, Barbara, new pirate, Miss Barbara, thank you, matey. He says, Rob, by today's standards, you could deem this house to be dilapidated, not fit to really even live in. Young Jake says that his grandfather did also teach him the trade of carpentry and how to fix things around the home. His grandfather was, as he said, kind of for this time period, kind of like a modern day handyman. Jake goes on to say that his home was huge, however, but it was just, to him, it was very haunting. Even from the outset of the house, it was just as scary as a young kid home to look at. He says it reminded him of a home that some sort of witch, a sorcerer, would live in. And he remembers this from the details that back when his parents were alive, about the early stories that the parents read to him. Jake goes on to tell me that his favorite stories was that of Hansel and Gretel. Jake says, Rob, I joked to myself because it seemed like I lived in that infamous house where the wicked witch raised and baked small children in her oven. And he kept thinking about this, you guys, and that just bothered him. The fable, the folklore passed on from his mom and dad. Rob, my early youth was simply a nightmare. He says, Rob, the one thing that always bothered me as he goes on is that this home was, despite the shiny construction of the house, every door, every window was secured with very heavy iron bars. He goes on to tell me that he even figured that the money invested in the ironclad steel was probably worth more than the entirety of the entire dwelling or the home itself. And this young kid, he was just thinking, he's a little bit older now, and he's like, why in the world does my grandfather have all these iron bars on every door, on every window? Why is he spending more money on seemingly protection than actually fixing up the other parts of the house? As he says, his house is kind of falling apart. He says, Rob, I really thought it was eerie because it was almost as though his grandfather was trying to keep someone or something out. Hi, Lawrence. How you doing? Good to see you all for coming on in. Robbie says another really peculiar and disturbing occurrence, which happened almost weekly, he goes on to tell me. He says when his grandfather was not home, which was a lot of the time, a very tall man would walk across the property. Rob, this tall man, he would stop in front of the home and he would just stare. This person, you guys, would stare into the house. He goes on to say that it's almost like this person was looking right through the walls of the house directly at him. He goes on to describe that the man had very long black hair. He was unkempt, very tall, as he mentioned earlier. And he was kind of robust. He kind of had a robust build about his body, his frame. He was always very dirty. This young Jake goes on to explain to me. And he thought it was particularly odd. And one thing that he very, very quickly noticed about this stranger peering into his house almost every other week or every week, he had this unusually long gray coat. He says, Rob, the coat went from the top of his shoulders right around roughly above the top of the ankles, in between the ankles and the knees. Robert kind of reminded me of the style of coat that was worn by the Confederate soldiers of the Civil War. He says the only difference, though, was there was long swaths of brownish leather seemed to be strewn or sewed all about the coat. He says, Rob, from my recollection, excuse me, guys, from looking out and peering out, seeing this person peering in at him, it seemed like it had some sort of weird emblems or patches also sewn into the fabric. He goes, Rob, I don't know, but this happened. This man, it just seemed like it just went on and on. He goes, Rob, I got to tell you that it seemed like this went on for almost a year. He says, finally, though, Rob, right around my 16th birthday, I decided that it was time to talk with his grandfather when he seen him, which was not very often. He wanted to explain to his grandfather about all the things that troubled him and, quite frankly, try to build a relationship. This young man, everybody, I feel sorry for this kid because grandfather never home. He lives in this piece of crap house. Some spooky guy has been walking past, peering into the house for a year. Grandfather's always gone, drinking. This young kid drops out of school, not because he did not want to go to school, but frankly, because granddad never got him there. He was embarrassed about the clothing that his grandfather provided for him. So this young guy, I feel for this kid as I'm reading through this, right? First thing he asks his grandfather when he finally gets him, when his grandfather is kind of sober, as he explains to me, he asks his grandfather about the bars. Grandfather, why are all these bars strewn or placed on the windows, the doors? Why are you spending money on bars, on security, when the house is falling apart? The grandfather looked at him and he says, young Jake, to his grandson, he says, it's for protection. Jake found it odd, kind of trembling, a little bit scared. He replies back, he says, protection? Protection from what? Or from who? Then Jake goes on to tell his grandfather, are you talking about the creepy man in the long gray coat that passes by the house every time you're gone? The same man that's been passing by for almost up to a year? Young Jake goes on to explain to me, he says, that his grandfather's face, it turns red. He becomes very nervous. He appears to be nervous. Grandfather says to Jake, I'm afraid to tell you this, grandson. You have seen evil. That's what the grandfather now is telling his grandson. So if we take a look back, this kid's got trauma from his early passing of the parents, the grandmother, never seeing his grandfather, doesn't go to school. He's pretty much left by himself. This kid's already got everything going on in his life that you can imagine. And now there's this additional element from his grandfather that tells him that Jake has seen evil. He was also taken aback, young Jake, about the grandfather's change in his temperament. Okay. The grandfather went on to tell Jake to wait here a minute, Jake. And they were sitting in the kitchen, if I recollect, and the grandfather, he quickly races up a staircase into one of the bedrooms or one of the rooms upstairs. So he hears the grandfather kind of rummaging about upstairs. He hears things being moved around, this, that, and the other. And so the grandfather now kind of returns to the kitchen. So grandfather comes down from upstairs and returns again into the kitchen. Now, when the grandpa comes down, everybody, he comes down with a rifle. The grandpa now, of course, again, comes from the upstairs with a rifle in a rather large silver box as he, again, comes downstairs, right? And he places the silver box on the table alongside the rifle. Now the grandfather now goes from the kitchen table where he puts this silver box and he starts clumsily fumbling about in one of the kitchen cabinets. He's, again, rummaging around for something else. A few seconds later, Grandpa produces a set of keys. He took one of the keys off this chain of keys and he opens the large silver box. Inside of this silver box, everybody, the grandfather pulls out old newspaper clippings. pulls out a handful of bullets. These bullets were not made of typical lead or copper. Goes on to say, Rob, they were made from what he knows about the difference between the coloration. They were silver. They were silver bullets. He's going through these newspaper clippings, and they were rather faded. He says, Rob, I could barely see the dates, the headlines of the paper. Again, faded. You could tell they were very old. However, the scribes or the articles or the headlines of interest were all circled in pencil. And in these headlines, in these clippings, in this very old newspaper, spoke about werewolves and dog-like creatures killing Union soldiers during the Civil War time. Thanks for everybody for coming on in. I'm not paying attention to chat. I'm trying to concentrate and remember most of this. Love you guys. Thank you. Give me a thumbs up, would you? Subscribe if you're new. Anyway, these newspaper articles chilled this young Jake to the bone. He is, again, these guys, here's another event. This poor kid. Hey, listen, every single one of us in the chat room and listening, wherever you're at in the world, we've all experienced hardship. We've all experienced tough times in our lives, whether we were kids, whether we were adults. You guys feel where I'm going with this. But this kid already, if you're paying attention to this story, this kid, one after another, the poor guy, my heart goes out to this young man, right? Well, back in the time, during his growing up with granddad. And one of the articles was described. Now, listen to this. They singled out an individual in one of the newspaper clippings about a very powerful man clad in a long Confederate coat embellished in leather. For those of you who were paying attention earlier, and I know you all are, almost identical to what young Jake has been seeing with this man coming past his home for the last year. Rob, I'm fearing for my life. I do not know what to do. It's hard enough to process my life as it is, and now I have this to deal with. Goes on further. There's another picture, again, in this very faded newspaper. He says, Rob, there is a drawing that resembled the very same man that has been walking past the house every time Grandpa's gone. So, young Jake sees this weird man dressed in the long Confederate coat with the leather, with the stitchings, sees him for almost a year, goes back to this old clippings newspaper from Civil War times and a rendition of a man very much resembles what he's been seeing over the last year. From how many decades ago was the Civil War, you guys? I don't know off the top of my head. That is extremely creepy. Grandfather saw the look on young Jake's face and asked Jake, is this the man you've been seeing? Jake says, yeah, Grandpa, it was. This is the same guy. Identical to the picture you're showing me. Grandfather's face once again looks very disturbed. His grandfather's face now takes on the element of fear. Grandfather looks fearful now. The grandfather went on to tell Jake about how this property had once been a battlefield during the Civil War. He said that many lives were lost on this very property during the war. Not by law, the lives, you guys, as he goes on to explain, was not lost by the hands of man or men from the wartime, but by beast. Lives were taken by the hands of beast. The grandfather goes on to tell young Jake that the man that you've been seeing is in fact not a man at all. He goes on to say that it's the leader. Back in the day, it was the leader. Okay, get this now. The leader of a wolf man like pack. This wolf like pack that went on and killed soldiers during the war. He went on to tell his grandson that this beast has not been on the property. Now, the grandfather tells him something here which I found strange. That the beast has not been on, and he uses the word the beast, okay, had not been on the property for over 20 years. Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but the Civil War was more than 20 years ago. So apparently, 20 years, this creature, whatever this is that grandfather's talking about from these newspaper clippings, this, that, and the other, was on the property some 20 years ago. He goes on to tell his grandson it's been gone up until the point of young Jake's arrival. The grandfather now goes on to tell Jake further that he shot and killed this man in which Jake has been seeing over 20 years ago when it was in the form of a wolf, much like the wolves that were depicted in the slaughter of soldiers during the Civil War. The grandfather now tells Jake that he buried the man, the werewolf, whatever you want to call it, in the back of the house at the tree line. The grandfather went on to say that he shot it with a silver bullet, much like the silver bullets contained in the box that he brought down from the upstairs. The grandfather grabbed young Jake by his hand, and they went off to the burial site in back of the house at the tree line. Jake and his grandfather, they reached the site, and the grandfather fell to his knees, and he began to weep. He began to cry. Jake can't really figure out why grandfather all of a sudden is on his knees crying at the gravesite. Then he kind of put two and two together. As you look toward the site now a little more closely, you notice that the grave had been overturned. And there was dirt strewn all about the area. And this very old coffin-like box was shattered, torn to pieces. It appeared as something or someone dug themselves out from the grave. From that day forward, you guys, after going through all of this, the experience at the grave, Jake telling the granddad what he's experienced, the articles, ever since that day, taking his son, his grandson, I should say, to the gravesite, Grandpa stopped drinking. But you know what else happened? Like grandfather was always gone, always left him at home, never saw him. Well, now the tables have turned. Grandfather again, done drinking, and he now never leaves the house. Rob, my grandfather spent all of his time now sitting on the front porch with his rifle in his hand. Rob, my grandfather has the rifle loaded with one silver bullet. So 6 months go by after grandfather telling the story to his grandson Jake. 6 months after inspecting the gravesite area, grandfather's now been sitting on this porch for 6 months, rifle in hand, loaded with a silver bullet. Rob, kind of ironically, he says to me that once grandfather stayed at home, sitting on the porch, never once did he see the man walk past the home that he had been seeing the previous year almost a couple times per week. 6 straight months, this man has not shown up. Rob, late one night, a week or so later, while he was asleep, well, after 6 months, nothing's gone on, hasn't seen this person. So during this end of this 6-month interval, Jake's up sleeping and he hears the sound of his grandfather's rifle go off. So grandfather shot at something, or the rifle went off. Jake gets up, races down the stairs where his bedroom was, and there stood his grandfather, rifle in hand. And he told him that he shot the evil. So apparently, at the end of this 6-month period, this person shows up. Grandfather sees him, whoever, whatever, shoots it. Rob, the body of this creature or this human being, whatever you want to call it, my grandpa and I never found it. A year later goes by, and grandfather passed away, leaving the grandson all by himself. One thing about grandpa, he told me, he taught me how to live off the land, fend for myself, how to garden, how to grow vegetables, how to hunt for my meat. Rob, I did this. I lived off the land by myself for 8 years, applying the tools of carpentry. I eventually went on and fixed up my house a little bit. Doesn't go on to tell me if he worked, you guys, so I can't get into that. Don't have the details. Pretty much just lived off the land, okay? He says, I finally, after 8 years, I made it into this city, and he got a job as a laborer. Barry goes on to tell me, Rob, my story finally gets a little bit better after the life that I've led, that he finally, on his job as a laborer back in the city, he found a woman, he fell in love. He says, Rob, today I'm happily married. He goes, Rob, I'll never forget my grandfather. All I can say in conclusion to this, as he writes to me, is, Rob, I can say this: evil takes many shapes and forms. I can bear witness to that. But I will tell you one thing: whether you call it werewolves, dogman, shapeshifters, to this day, I really don't know what it was, what I saw, what grandfather shot, or even the story about these werewolves killing soldiers in the Civil War. True or not, he says, I don't know, but what I saw, and I'll never forget it. Thanks for letting me share, he says. Yeah, that's pretty creepy. I got to tell you, the first thing that stands out to me is this poor kid, everybody, eh? What a life. All these years, tragedies, parents car wreck die. The grandmom dies. Never really met the grandfather before. Thank you, Midnight Smoker. Midnight Smoker, I appreciate that. That's awesome for the super chat. I need to unlazy and contact you about my past and recent experiences and families with the large black wolf, glowing red eyes. Yeah, again, a Midnight Smoker. My email beyondbmr@gmail.com. This is where I get a lot of these stories for you guys and be more than willing to listen to you. That's what I do. I love doing this. I like helping people get through these things. So yes, thanks for coming on in. Thanks for the awesome donation. So yeah, I mean, yeah, it is snowing, Val. It's snowing here too, but it's 40. But anyway, this poor kid, if you're coming in late, you gotta listen to this first part of the show. Mesmerizing, poor soul, poor kid. I'm glad he found love, you guys. I'm glad that he's now back in the real world. It seems like this guy, lived off the land ever since he was a young teenager. You know, parents died early, as I said. Grandma never met him. Never met the grandfather until being thrust into living with grandpa, an alcoholic, never home. This poor kid, I can't imagine that life. I give this guy all the credit in the world for pulling it together, getting a job, getting married, and going through this crazy account that he experienced. So, hats off to him, really, so much. I got another one here for you guys. I got this from a guy named Jim on an email. And this takes place in Marionville, Pennsylvania. You ready for this one, Val? My friend Val lives in PA, Pennsylvania. So this Jim goes on. He tells me, hey, Rob, I just came across your channel recently. Now, when I got this email, I can't tell you. I have so many. I don't know the dates, but he probably sent this out way longer than what he's saying. I just came across your channel recently. He says roughly 2 months ago from the date of the email. And he goes on that he enjoys the variety of the content, this, that, and the other. He loves the guests I bring on. He also mentioned my other friends, Tex, the Blondes and the Booze. So a very nice email. I was happy. I was a little proud of it that somebody said something nice, had something nice to say. And you all do, by the way. He says, I don't get involved in the chat room. I lurk. I mostly watch replay. Again, he goes on to say to me, his name's Jim. And he goes, to really what he loves most about the channel is the encounter stories I do. So he got it together and he sent me this to you. He goes, Rob, I just decided to go for it and send this to you. Okay. He goes on to tell me, he says, Rob, I don't know if I'm bold enough to call myself a researcher, but I've spent a lot of time, an enormous amount of time, he goes on to explain, out in the woods, dating back to the year right around 2015, when he moved from Canton, Ohio, over to live in, of course, Marionville, Pennsylvania. He says, Rob, where I live is just a rock's throw away from the Allegheny National Forest. Rob, I'm an avid hunter, fisherman, and just a general all-around or outdoorsman. Again, outside of being very familiar with camping, he's also very familiar, and this guy's very astute at the safety precautions associated with camping, wildlife, hunting, fishing, and so on. I'm very knowledgeable about tracking animals, tracking prints. Very familiar with the sounds of Mother Nature, all the animals, all the insects, the birds. Well versed, this guy, okay? I consider myself to be not an expert, Rob, but very experienced, very astute, very good at what I do. So he says, enough about me and my background. He goes, well, going back to my years living out in Ohio, more specifically now, he goes back from the year of 2007, or he says maybe 2008, I forget. 2007 or 8, everybody. He became fascinated with the subject of Sasquatch, or Bigfoot, as he says. But he says, Rob, I always figured, Bigfoot to be that of legend, be that of myth. Spurred on, he drops First Nations people, spurred on by the Patterson Gimlin film and all these earlier shows like In Search of this, that, and the other. He says, so Rob, kind of one day on a whim, kind of out of boredom, he says he went back and started looking up more in depthly on Bigfoot. So he starts Googling Bigfoot, this, that, and the other. He even started watching YouTube channels, this, that, and the other. Again, he goes, man, with all the years that I've been out hunting and fishing and camping, I never once considered Bigfoot. I never saw Bigfoot. Always interested in the back of my mind, but man, I've been out for all the years I've been out. How come I've never seen one or come across it? So he says after several days and hours of reading things about it, he decided his next step now is to be very serious and go look for evidence. So now everybody, again, the guy knows about Bigfoot, interested in Bigfoot, has watched several shows, never thought it was anything, but as all the years he's been hunting, camping, fishing, and tracking, never anything. But now he's going ahead, he's going to take it serious and try to look for evidence and really look and see if he can come up with an experience. So he goes on to tell me that he just went to look for the basics. He's trying to look for footprints, tree breaks, listen for unusual sounds, obscure structures like we've all heard about, the X structure, just the basics. He's never seen it, never looked for it. This is his plan. He goes, again, Rob, during this entire time of doing this, I'm setting forth a earnest effort, and he never came up with evidence. Rob, no tracks, no sounds, no structures. Still, though, my interests are high because of all the people that I've heard on your show and other podcasts. There's got to be something more to this. I'm just not having any luck, he goes on to say. He keeps on his journey. He's intent. He's focused. And this all was taking place, everybody, again, in Ohio in 2007 and 8. So all this this man's research all take place in Ohio. Unfulfilled, he goes on to say, until he moved to Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania. He's in Pennsylvania in the year of 2015. And he says, what I discovered, man, was amazing, but it was not that of Bigfoot. But he says his experience was mind-blowing. He says he thinks he came across, as he says, the so-called Dogman. Hey, Moggs, good to see you, brother. Good to see you all. If I did not say hi, love y'all. Thanks for coming in. You gotta watch the replay. You gotta watch the replay. All I gotta say. Give me a thumbs up, by the way. And if you're new, please subscribe. Thank you. So moving on with this story here, this encounter. Again, he arrives in Marionville, Pennsylvania in the year of 2015. He's nestled just outside of the Allegheny National Forest. Rob, this is my dream house, my dream area. I'm right into the woods. He goes, at this time, he's glad to be away from the city, the hustle, the bustle of everyday city life. And moving now outside of the suburbs, it was just time for him to settle down and concentrate more on his research. Oh, by the way, Rob, I just retired, got all the time in the world. He says he worked in manufacturing in Ohio, if I remember, and then ever since he was 18, saved a lot of money, and he retired early, like in his early 50s. So now he can dedicate into this genre we call Bigfoot or cryptids. Worked 32 years. Rob, I've never been married. I never had kids. Single guy. I'm kind of a loner, he goes on to say. So again, I'm going to move on and tell me what he actually came across. He says, unlike, again, I'm in Marionville, Pennsylvania, and I go about doing my research, he says. He goes, again, just like Ohio, his efforts to find any evidence of Bigfoot came amuck. Nothing. Came up empty. Rob, I'm about to hang it up, he says. I'm getting frustrated, but I'm still going to trudge on and just give it one last shot over the next year or so. He says, early in the summer of 2016, he says he comes across something that to this day had him gripped in total fear and in shock. I was camping in the Allegheny, he says, for about 1 week. He spent the time fishing and hiking, and again, his sights were set on looking and finding Bigfoot. It was not until the last night where he says his world, as he says to me, that I recall, turns upside down. He goes, it's almost like my world went into and shifted into a different paradigm. Late one night, he says, I heard bristling about the tree line about 20 yards from his campsite. It sounded like walking, bipedal footsteps. He says his heart starts to race, and he thinks aloud, could this be the creature that's forever eluded me? Do I really have a Bigfoot near me? Then he says, all of a sudden, Rob, the footfall stops. The forest grew silent. I like when people really quickly, you guys, I'm all about data, as most of you folks know out there. And I love when I get these stories and they always talk about how the forest grows silent. You guys know what I mean? Because again, we've all, not just my show, but I know you guys watch other channels and listen to podcasts, watch TV. Isn't it always peculiar that right before an encounter or whatever's going on, even paranormal stuff, ghosts, the forest grows silent. So, forest grows silent, the footfall stops. Then he says, Rob, man, a large, thunderous cry that sounded like a wolf, but much more menacing, roared from just inside the tree line. He says, Rob, man, my skin grew cold. But the weird thing is, I know that where he's at in this part of the Allegheny, that wolves are not in this part. I didn't look that up. I don't know if there's wolves in the Allegheny National Forest. Somebody could leave a comment. I don't know. He goes, so I got scared. He goes, yeah, Rob, there are bears here. There's foxes and other wildlife, but not a wolf. He says, and this howl was very deep. It was very intense. And it was much different than like the shrill of a fox. Because I guess foxes, you guys, they put off, a fox can make a million different sounds, screams, yells, yelps, all these things, much like most of the predatorial canine type creatures, right? Or animals. He goes, so he looks out into the tree line from where the sounds came from. Then as he's looking into the tree line, he sees a set of glowing reddish eyes. They pierced in at him. He says the eyes hovered a good 6 or 7 feet from the ground. Then he realized this had to be a dogman. He's just thinking dogman, the wolf-like howls, piercing red eyes. He says he knew about dogman. As a subject, he always seemed to spring up when he was researching or looking up Bigfoot. And yeah, that's for sure. We all know that, right? But he said he never really paid much attention to Dogman. He was still not really a big believer in Bigfoot, let alone why would I believe in Dogman when I first have been looking for Bigfoot for years and never even found anything close to any sort of evidence. So he basically doubted the existence of Dogman. And quite frankly, you guys, he ain't too keen on Bigfoot either. He says, however, man, this sound was terrifying. The red eyes, he repeats to me. The bipedal movements. Now he says, man, I'm thinking much differently. There's something weird going on here. He says, I stared at those red eyes and I heard the roar come from the woodline. Then he says, all of a sudden, the eye shine goes away. The shrilling sound went away. He says he did not sleep a wink that night during this experience. The morning came in. When the morning came, and at daybreak, he left for home. Rob, man, on the drive home, he says, I kept thinking over and over again what this was. Did I really experience a dog, man? He says it wasn't into about 30 minutes, half hour or so into his ride from his campsite after having this experience. And again, red eyes, sounds of a wolf. Now he thinks maybe he's seen a dog man, leaves camp. He's driving home. He's 30 minutes in his car. He says, for whatever the reason is, I got this very odd feeling inside myself. And he says, Rob, it was strange. I'm driving in my vehicle and I got this feeling that I was being followed or that I was being watched from when I'm driving my car. He's like, how can this be? How can I? Now this guy's thinking to himself aloud in his mind. He goes, I'm in my vehicle away from my campsite. How come I have this eerie feeling that something's watching and following me? He finally gets home. He sets a foot inside of his house. He says, and he's at home chilling out, and he's just kind of going back over his experience in the woods. And he says, the nighttime is getting close. And he decides he's going to go to sleep and turn in for the night. He says right around 3:00 in the morning, he was awakened by a horrific sounds now from his house at home, way far away from his campsite. Horrifying sounds wolf-like screams. Then he hears bipedal steps walking on the roof of his house. Okay, if we backtrack a little bit on this, okay, the guy in the forest heard bipedal walking, sees the red eyes, hears the howls, leaves the campsite, driving home 30 minutes or so from his campsite, gets to the house, turns in for the night. He's in bed, 3 in the morning, howls, bipedal walking, but not on the perimeter of his house, bipedal walking on his roof. Then all of a sudden he says, Rob, there's this terrible ripping sound. Like something was being torn away, like the shingles were being torn away from on his roof. Literally being torn. He runs over to one of the windows in the house. He says, I believe he says it was the bedroom window. And to his dismay, he says he's seen shingles and wood from the roof was flying down onto the ground below. Like something was up there, tearing it up and tossing it from the top of the roof onto the ground. And he's seeing this through the bedroom window. He doesn't know what to do. He's in shock. He goes, what can this be? I don't get this. First of all, he's thinking no human being is up there doing that. And if it was, they got to be crazy. What the hell's their problem? I mean, I don't know. What would you guys think, right? He's not fully thinking, so he races. I mean, the guy all of a sudden he races into his closet and he pulls out a shotgun from inside of his closet. And he goes and he runs outside. He runs outside his back door, as he says. And then he says, hey, Rob, shingles flailing off my roof, particles of wood flailing off my roof. Gets outside, looks up on his roof. He says, there, he said he saw this wolf-like creature standing on top of the roof. Rob, it had pointed it had pointed ears. One thing I remember mostly, a long snout and pointed ears that projected off the side of his head. And they were unlike any other dog or wolf he's seen. They were like almost like 6 inches like tall off the side of the head, right? Again, the long snout. He says he's seen some fangs glistening in the moonlight. 3 o'clock in the morning, whatever time this was. 3 o'clock, yeah, that's right. And he said those same red eyes that he's seen from the woodline prior in the day were glistening down at him. He says those eyes looked right through me, he says, Rob. He says in one instance, it kind of looked human-like, but wolf-like. He said it had hands, but the hands had extended talons, like they're extended out. And he says that as he's out there, as these things, as this creature makes eye contact with him, it takes a piece of shingle from the top of the roof and it kind of flings it at this guy on the ground outside of his house, shotgun in hand. He says he lets his blast off from his shotgun, and he didn't know. He says he kind of was jolted from the blast. He didn't understand. He kind of fell backward a little bit. He says he stumbles to the ground. Then he looks up towards the roof, toward the creature that he shot at. And then he's seeing this thing jump right off of the roof. And he says, Rob, this creature lands not 5 or 6 feet on the side of him. And this guy's laying on the ground, tries to reach for the shotgun, but this thing did not attack him. And it turns around and sped off on 2 legs, he says, and ran towards the tree line. Rob, I now get up, get my act together, and I fired toward this creature running toward the tree line. He says, I was amazed at how fast it ran. It was like a blur, he said. I fired. I know I didn't hit it. Then, right before this creature gets into the tree line, before it's advancing to the tree line, all of a sudden he says, Rob, I notice a brilliant orange like ball or sphere emerge from the tree line as this creature is running towards this. He says, now this creature kind of veers off and it runs toward this sphere or this orb, whatever you want to call it, he says. It reminded him in the distance of an oversized beach ball. And as this creature got closer to this sphere, it runs toward it. He says, Rob, it seems like it ran inside of it, like it disappeared into it. And the sphere like circular object, kind of like it absorbed this creature. And then the orb itself whisked off into the forest and was gone. Rob, I don't know what this was, what I went on to say, what he goes on to tell me. He says, excuse me, guys. He said, I quickly, though, before I end the story, would like to tell you this, that I went around, I quickly ran around, looked around the next morning, that night into the morning. He was looking around his house. He saw no footprints, no tracks. When this creature apparently ran from his house to the wood line, he was looking diligently. And as I made mention earlier, there's a reason why he told me that he was a tracker and knew all about wildlife, but he could not pick up any tracks, no footprints, nothing. He even ventured on top of his roof, as he goes on to tell me, where the shingles were ripped apart. And in fact, they were tore, but there was nothing up there. There was not even any marks of being torn away. He says, in other words, there was no, he's seen claws on this creature, but there was no grooves from claws or anything in there. And there was no evidence of anything being sawed, how it was brought up. It had been just by fingers. So nothing there, but nothing, not a darn bit of evidence outside of what he visualized, you guys, but nothing physical as far as tracks and such. He says, Rob, this took place in 2016. And for whatever the reason, I haven't seen it since. And he goes, I still look for this thing. He goes, call me crazy. I still need answers. I still look for it. And he sent me this email. I think it was in 2024, you guys. So that was like 8 years. I guess for 8 years, he's been looking for this. Hasn't come up with anything. Hasn't never seen the Bigfoot. Hasn't seen this creature. But yeah. However, in conclusion, one thing that I do see quite frequently every other month, I do see the orange orb dancing about in the tree line. And he's like thinking, maybe it's letting me know it's still there. Rob, what do you think this was? How can you explain the orb? I still see the orb. What was this? Where'd it come from? If you have any advice. And I don't know what I texted this guy back or emailed him back. It was a little while ago when I did this, but I don't know. That was, hey, a lot of good data there. I mean, pretty cool story. We all heard about the orbs. Did this thing disappear into a portal? Did it come from another dimension, a different plane? I found it interesting that what he described, what he saw in the forest, he saw once again, except for the physicality of the creature, when he eventually seen that, it was apparent at his home with the red eyes, this, that, and the other. I thought it was very creepy and very apparent, though, that as he was driving home, you guys, inside of his car, 30-mile ride in the car, that inside his own car, he felt he was being watched and followed, despite being in a car going, 40 miles an hour or whatever. But I think this thing followed him home somehow. And I think that what he saw is what he saw in the woods. Can't explain the orbs, how it disappeared in the woods. But I thought that was pretty cool. I got this mystery of Lake Superior to close out the show for you guys. But I've got to get some more water. So I'll be back. Don't go nowhere. Thanks for coming on in. Like, share, subscribe if you're new. I appreciate you guys. I've got to get some more water. I'll be back in less than a minute. It's not too far from me. Love you guys. Be right back. Before I go on with the next one, I'm going to kind of look in chat and see what you guys, if you had any questions or anything. I'm not sure. Really quickly, I hope you guys liked it. The first, if you're coming in late, I did two encounters, and the first one was a Civil War legion of, I guess, a army, a pack, a leader of a pack of a werewolf tormented this young kid and his grandfather. And I'm just going through the chat. Hey, Mark Beasel, Mike, good to see you. Joe Two Pops, Gary Spike Sr., good to see you. Bigfoot Dwarf, Mike Bothwell, Joe Stewart, thanks, Joe. Glad you're enjoying the show. Mickey G, a lot of the same people, about 70 of you in here. Hey, Joe Pops, I don't know if I got you earlier. Thank you for that. Thank you to Keith. Thank you to Barbara. Thank you to Midnight Smoker and Joe Two Pops for your awesome super chats. Totally appreciative, not expected, and I always very humbled by that for forking out some of your hard-earned money. I love it. I love you guys, and I trust me, I take that very seriously when I say that. So thank you for that. Appreciated. Yeah, no, I did not mute myself, Val. When I go solo, I do it. I gotta know. Hey, check this out, Val. I wrote this note. Mute. I highlighted it. Don't mute yourself. Twice now in the last couple of weeks, I muted myself for like 5 minutes. And I hate that. To me, it wrecks the show. But you guys are, you guys understand that. So yeah, I'm very cognizant now of what I do without a co-host, because I've tried to read the chat, which I don't, and things like that. But I appreciate you guys for coming in. I really do. If you would care to give me a thumbs up. And of course, I went to get my water and I didn't bring it with me. I just get so involved with these shows that within you guys that I sometimes lose track of what I'm doing sometimes. Anyway, thank you so much for coming in. Hit that thumbs up button. Go check out the Blondes and Booze when they after this show, because I think I might be on with them. I don't know what we're doing. I said I would join them with Donnie Cho and Jason McLean. I don't know what we're doing. But thanks to you for coming in. I got one more. This is really cool. Appreciate you guys. And let's get on with this. This you guys are gonna like this one. I love doing stories about the Great Lakes. And I like doing stories about First Nations. I respect the First Nations wholeheartedly. many of the First Nations believe that these cryptids are spiritual in nature, protectors of the forest in a lot of cases, and sometimes the opposite, the good, the bad, and the ugly, if you will. And I really take into what they say because it kind of makes a lot of sense. Because good old Rob, I'm out in the Aper camp. I think that Bigfoot itself is more than a flesh and blood creature. I think it has elements of flesh and blood. I don't deny that, but there's also a supernatural element that I have to believe. What I saw, I certainly think was flesh and blood, but it still just amazes me how some of these accounts that we all hear about, how they just vanish, they disappear. Just like the last story, I talked about the portals, or in this case, the orbs. And I think an orb is a form of a portal. We've heard a lot of those cases. And so there's just this genre is just so fascinating for me. I don't know anything. I really don't. I've talked to hundreds of people, on the show, interviewed researchers, experiencers, folks like you guys, like Keith, who was on, last month talking about his awesome encounters with the Dogman and other things in the paranormal realm. So there's so much of this to digest. I think all these things are related. The paranormal element, even the UFO alien element. I think they're all connected. I think there's that vibration, that energy where it just makes sense to me. I don't know if you guys think that way. I think a lot of you probably think the way I do. So with that being said, I'm gonna go on with this last one to close out the show. Thanks once again for coming in. Please hit that like button. I appreciate you. This is from this young lady, and she goes by, well, her name, she says it's not her real tribal name, is Little Small Fox, as she presents herself. And Rob, I'm sending you this email on this experience that I had with a dog man hunting our tribal village for decades. She now, excuse me, everybody. Sorry about that. Clearing my throat here. She does go on to say, though, that I first have to say that if any of her tribal commune knew that she was passing this information along to me, especially for any public publication, which, by the way, she said yes, she wanted me to air, would deem her as an outcast amongst her people. She says, Rob, I am from the Sakaogan Chippewa community of the St. Croix Chippewa Indians in Wisconsin. We reside off of the shores of Lake Superior. And this young lady in this email goes on and emphatically tells me throughout how she's already given me too much information. As she's writing this, she's very reluctant of what she's doing, very reluctant to have me tell it. But as she says, everything she's given me is not her real name, this, that, and the other. And she's pretty rest assured she doesn't think that any of her family members of the tribe or the community within the tribe will come across this. I don't know. She goes, however, Rob, despite all of this, this needs to be told. My tribe would emphatically deny any of this, but so be it. Again, she goes on to say that she's a female. She refers to herself as Little Small Fox, not her true given Chippewa name, but that's what she rolls with. And I respect that, of course. I respect her for giving this out to me, anyways. 100%. She goes, this story has been passed down to me by the elders for generations. And it's something that has been kept close to the vest within their tribal community. Robert, our village of the Sikogan, I probably butchering that by the way, is very peaceful. Okay. Very tranquil. It's a beautiful area. You got the shoreline of Lake Superior, the breezes. Her village has a lot of quaint roads and trails that run through the area. But the story sent down by the elders was that of an unsettling presence that began to cast a shadow over their community. Rumors throughout the years, the decades, including up until today, have always spread like wildfire about a mysterious creature lurking in the depths of the forest, rushing off of Lake Superior. It's a creature that she goes on to say, unlike anything that she's ever heard or encountered or ever experienced. She goes on to say that even their spiritual advisor of the tribe cannot believe it. But she also goes on to say that the spiritual protector, more commonly known as Sasquatch, could not even stand up to remove this evil, as she says, from the lands. So now, looking at this and listening to this, they believe in Sasquatch as their spiritual protector of their land. And I get that. I've heard that many, many times. But even the Sasquatch has been deemed difficult or having difficulties in protecting them. He goes, I'm just going to call it the dog man, but our tribe has another name that we go by, which I'm not going to give you just for my own protection, she says. Okay, I'll go with that. Legend has it about this creature being a very tall, imposing figure with the body of a man and the head of a fearsome wolf-like canine roams the area. This belief ran throughout the tribe and filled the hearts of the First Nations people of her tribe with fear, especially when they heard these tales. Most of them, however, would dismiss them, even for us, as mere myth and legend. After all, we were protected by Sasquatch, she goes on to say. She goes on to say that as nightfall descended upon the Sikogan tribe, eerie howls echoed through the darkness, sending shivers down the village. Everybody's in terror. The town, their village, soon found themselves under attack by some sort of enigmatic being, something they can't comprehend. They said, Rob, livestock went missing under mysterious circumstances. Then eventually, everybody, she goes on to say, eventually, not just the livestock was turning up missing, but our children mysteriously started to come up missing. A lot of the children, you guys, she's going on to tell me in this email, okay, were never found. There were no clues, no reasoning. Tribal police kept it to themselves. The kids started to vanish. the children. She goes on to say that even some of our bravest of warriors, they claim to have come face with this creature. But they were very fearful of it. They did not dare provoke it. They did not dare attack it or rid it of the land. They did not hunt it. The villagers began to barricade their homes. They had alerts, they had watches. The children were hidden within their homes at night. Stories came about at night around campfires talking about the high strangeness that was going on here. The elders gathered together over decades on how to rid or protect themselves from the inherent evil that presumably was spreading through their lands. Presumably, according to this email, taking their children. They all feared that this would not end and many more of the children would come up missing. Then they got together, and she says, I'm going to call this elder, our elder, now here in current times, okay? She goes, I'm just call him Elder Dan or Chief Sam. He was very eccentric, and he says now at the time they had to put a stop to this, what was happening off the shores of Lake Superior. He put together a tribal team of the fiercest of warriors to go hunt and for the very last time confront this and not run from it, not hide from it, but to go out and attack it and get rid of it or do whatever they can to protect not only the children, but everybody within the commune. Chief Dan goes about, he assembles their warriors, and they delve deeper into the history first of the Segogan. So I guess the elder here more in present time, right, back when this was sent, back when the year that she told me about this elder was one of the first ones that really did a deep dive into the history of their tribe. And although the history was always there, you guys, it was never made public amongst their community. But he said it was time to let their tribe know about the past over the last several decades. So he thought it was imperative that they knew what they were up against and what their tribal members were up to in certain decades. So I guess this chief Sam discovered a hidden secret, okay, that's encompassed the past times, the times of the past. Legends spoke of an ancient curse that had been fallen the town centuries ago, transforming one family into shape-shifting creatures as punishment for their dark deeds. So again, I guess centuries ago, part of this tribe was performing acts that was deemed cursed as punishment for whatever they were doing. It goes on to say through unexpected alliances with other tribes and all these different encounters that came off, they came across the self-realization and self-discovery that really was the main haunting behind what was going on and why these fears were never attacked head on because of the embarrassment. They said that this dogman creature was simply not a monster that they had to fear, but it was a reflection of their own inner demons. Did you guys hear that? They went on to determine that this dogman was a reflection of the tribe's inner demons. It was found out that for many, many decades prior to the current events or to current day, that this land was not very peaceful, I guess, you guys. I guess pillaging, murder, other atrocities was committed by certain tribal members over the decades, leading for this so-called curse to be bestowed upon the village. So, if we're going back at this, there's disappearances with a lot of these children, and I guess there's some unhidden truths that were never publicly announced within the community, only held at close quarters by the elders, and this never was made public until now about some of the nefarious activities that has taken place among this tribe. She goes, Rob, it's a daily battle against these demons. Our children are continually being protected. We don't let them out of our sight. Our tribal police keeps it under wraps. We continuously, because of our past, the wrongdoings of our past, have this burden to dwell. Nothing but negativity is bestowed upon us. Children still to this day come up missing, never to be found. We do not report it. It's not made public. I do not know where to go with this. The howls from the howls keep echoing from the foothills off of the shorelines of Lake Superior. I don't know what to tell you, Rob. That was a short email I'm sending you because I can get more involved with this, but I had to get this off of my chest because of what's happened with my past descendants about the past evil doings. There's now allegedly some curse bestowed upon us where we're frightened for our children and they come up disappearing. And that's where she left the email off. And that was a short one. And I don't know I don't know about that. I don't know if it's somebody who wants 15 minutes of fame or something, which you're not getting any fame on this show. Everything, I've never heard of anything. I mean, in today's modern world, that would be reported, don't you think? I mean, I don't know. I'm a novice when it comes to the law of certain tribes. Do they keep everything under vest? Do they not report missing people? We have the 411. We've heard about this. We've got all these reports. But she allegedly, according to this short little story that she sent me, is that this happens on a daily basis up until today. She still lives here, Lake Superior, still with this tribe, still has these problems, and I guess it's been going on for decades. I don't know. I closed it out with a short one because I wanted to get this under the time limit. I thought it was interesting to share. If you're new here, please subscribe to Bigfoot Michiganrob on YouTube. I appreciate all of you for coming in tonight. Think about that though. Leave a comment because I don't know how to break that down at all. Part of me doesn't believe it, and I'm going to be honest with you because you guys know I'm transparent. Don't know how accurate. But again, I don't judge other people because I tell my story all the time. And I know what it's like to be judged and ridiculed. We've all been there. I've certainly been there. That's why if you send me an encounter, I'm not going to judge you. I'm not going to ridicule you. I'll share it if you want me to, like I did for little small fox. I'm not calling you out, small fox. I need more information to put it all together, but I trust something is happening. I'm trusting something is happening. And if you send me an encounter, I'm not going to just besmirch you in any way, shape, or form. I am BMR. We got the Blondes and the Booze coming up in 20 minutes. I want to thank, once again, Keith, Barbara, Midnight Smoker, and Joe for the awesome super chats. Please give me a thumbs up. Subscribe if you're new. I'll be doing these on Fridays between 6 and 6:30. You guys seem to like them. I certainly enjoy putting them out. I've got a whole bunch more stowed away over the last several years for you guys. Thanks for coming on in. If I didn't say hi to you, not because I don't love you, just didn't see you. With that being said, I am BMR. And until next time, everybody have a fantastic weekend. And I just got to be texting and look for the exit button. I'm out.
This is the future. Evolution.
The Crossing Realms Conference launches September 19th and 20th and will dock in Richmond, Missouri. This is already being called the event of the year, folks, with an unprecedented list of speakers and special guests, 2 days of cryptids, UFOs, and paranormal presentations, along with a celebrity-filled ghost hunt, meet and greet, gallery reading, vendors, and a film screening. This promises to be both educational and fun. Go to eventbrite.com to secure your tickets and vendor slots before they are all abducted. They're going fast.